And Lisa and Lauren's there. We're really excited today. We have Shanta Lee Gander here. Just tell us a little bit about your passion for art, creativity, poetry, and the seen and the unseen.
Thank you. It's pretty fitting because, like I just shared before we got started live, my best friend and I were creeping around at night, just looking at some of the bones and structures of history here in Pennsylvania. I love abandoned places. I write across genres. I love exploring, especially the unseen within the self, but also the unseen within a landscape. Actually, very fitting. The day before we were crawling around, I was on my belly taking pictures of some tiny people's village that was a part of an amusement park, crumbling structures. So I find that on the page, or even if it's behind my camera, like there are always things revealed, you know, in landscape, especially if we're talking topography of self. And I just all around love to create. Recently, I got into some little bit of film making for my exhibition, Dark Goddess, an exploration of the sacred feminine, that's up right now at the Fleming Museum of Arts. So, yeah, here's actually my first book, Ghetto Claustrophobia, Dreaming of Mama While Trying to Speak Woman in Woke Tongues. And my second book, Black Metamorphoses, which is a conversation with Ovid, is coming out next year through Etruscan Press. Ghetto Claustrophobia is through Diodes. So yeah, I love to create, and I love that this is a dialogue, like back and forth, because that's a part of my creation process too.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I was going across and looking at all your work. I've read some of your poetry and some of your writings, and you would call it multifaceted, and but it makes total sense given what you're interested in doing. Of course it would be multifaceted because that's exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about the multifaceted self-identity, multifaceted cultural identity, relationship
Yes.
with history and the future and the present time and things like that. And I feel
Yes.
like when Lisa and I started to like dig into your work and stuff, we thought a lot about storytelling and the power of art to tell one's own story, but also to tell the story of us. And so the question we sort of thought we would dive into is how art can help someone share their story. So how do you think art can do that?
It's funny because the whole idea or concept of storytelling in and of itself, like if we take it off the mantle, not to say, sometimes I think we put a lot of things on mantle art, and art carries this whole heavy weight, and then it implies that someone has to be an artist and capital A artist and all that. But I want to step back and unpeel the layer of story itself. Story itself, because as I thought about that question in preparation for this, I thought is so old and so human, and we live for stories, and everybody does it. Even for people who say, I'm not creative, or I'm not an artist, or I don't, whatever things we like to claim we're not. But get somebody on a good topic, right, of a story, and we learn it from our families. And I think there's a way. It's funny because I think stories also they serve different purposes. I feel like storytellers and that those we share stories with around the fire, they can bear as our witnesses, and it's also improv. I was thinking about this. My best friend and I, we were actually plotting, oh, what stories are we going to tell around the table when it's dinner time, when it's time, oh, we got to tell this story, we got to tell this story, we got to tell that story, because we do this co-told narrative a lot. And people do that all the time, where people will retell something and they'll say, no, it happened like this, or I remember that, or you forgot this part. And sometimes it can be a part of healing. But sometimes the reason why I step back from that is I say, well, the other question then becomes, does art have to take on that responsibility of having to fix something? Or is this because we're sharing? Because once you put a story out into the universe, then it becomes community pots. And then we're we're getting something from it. It's like I always compare things a lot to sculptures
Hmm.
and how different people, depending on what they're seeing and walking around, they will all see different things.
Oh yeah.
And that's how it is with our lives, even, and memory. And
Hmm.
so it all, I think it's key. It's inherent to what we do as human beings. It's not necessarily attached to giving it its title to say it's, even though it is art, but to make it accessible, it's just what we do. If we think about it, it's just what we do, because we also tell stories to ourselves, almost like lullabies, right? We repeat things to ourselves. That's why we have to be careful about what we're telling ourselves, right? Right? And
Yeah.
so it's like so key. It's also
Hmm.
key in not recounting our lives, but in making our lives.
Hmm.
And if we so wish, unstitching and stitching something back together, we can change a pattern with a story.
Yeah.
I
Well
feel like
said.
today, like I feel like I rambled, but I hope
No.
that got.
No, that made
You,
I
you
mean, it
were
made sense.
weaving. What I really like, I love that you use the word biomythic. Talk about
Yeah.
that, because I love the idea of living our lives like mythology, like a big story. You were talking
Oh,
about creating a story,
listen.
like the hero's
Yes.
journey or the heroine's journey, right?
Yeah, because it's okay. So I was thinking about this. Zora Neale Hurston popped into my head the other day, and I was thinking about Jamie. Their eyes were watching God. I was like, wait a minute, that was the heroine's. She was the heroine's journey before we recognized that there was the heroine missing, or whoever, the individual's journey, right? And mythology is huge. As I just mentioned, so my second book, Black Metamorphoses, is coming out through Etruscan Press next year at some point, and it just felt natural. Now, even though I pick on myself even and say, okay, the Greek mythology, everybody and their grandmama and their dog and their cats done it, but how can I do it right? We know that's true. But then how can we do it in a way? I mean, it still plays out in our headlines. Last year it was Naked Athena. And I'm like, well,
Yes.
why Athena? Which is hence my, dark goddess has been long before that, for years, just sitting in my body. But thinking about, well, who else is in this pantheon? What other female energy, feminine bodies are in this pantheon? Also, beyond just deifying or reifying what we say is the good or the great. How do we look at this also? Can we look at our flaws through the lessons we get from them? And I think that's the role myth and even fairy tales play. It's like, how can we mine that and look at that and not turn away from it? I'm not going to use there's a shadow work. I don't, it's like that's too, like, whatever it is. But I've always dwelled into the balance of the dark, like all of that. But the dark is the good and the juicy. And how can we take that, and how can also that be a part of our story? And I think we all have access to myth making, and we don't have to be anything we're not in order to access it. We already are the myth.
Right. Just like you were saying, right? Everybody has their own story. Everybody has their own perspective because they have their own experience. So of course, everybody would have their own myth. My question is that I feel like, since we're talking about storytelling, I actually feel like a lot of stories that we are told and then inevitably maybe tell ourselves are actually packed with lessons that are maybe not the thing we should actually be learning.
Right.
Like I kind of think about it as a learned behavior, and I've been using the word a lot in my own mind. Like, what kind of messaging did I receive as a child through those stories, through those myths?
Right.
I mean, just any fairy tale that I let's just talk about, Disney fairy tales when you were younger and things like that. There's
Little Mermaid. Little Mermaid is very telling. Literally, that's a very telling one, actually, because she gave up her tongue. You remember
Yeah.
that? Where like she
Yes.
literally traded for some legs. Ursula
She
took
traded
her.
her
I mean, that's a
voice. Yeah.
whole. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh wow. Yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah,
What kind of thing does that tell a young female when, because Little Mermaid, if you can't tell, she was my fave because I could actually identify with her. She's a redhead. I was
yes,
like, oh yeah, that's
yes,
me. And then I'm like,
yes.
what? Because I'm not the
It's
type
like
of person that
pump the brakes. It's like wait, pump the brakes.
I
No, no,
don't
no.
hold
Me
my
and her
tongue.
don't identify in that way.
Right. I don't hold my tongue. And so,
Right.
but it's also like, how is that not being ingested by me? Because I watched it, I memorized it. So of course it was
Right.
being ingested by me.
Of
Of course
course.
it was impacting me, even though I had a separate person inside my own brain being like, no, thanks. So
Right.
so I think we need to talk about it's not only about using art to tell your story, but it's about
Right.
like what kind of story is being like almost put on top of you through, I mean, I don't know how to
Well,
explain
no,
that.
that actually it makes a lot of sense because so my first graduate degree, when I was wrapping up my MBA, I did some work around the grand narrative. I looked at feminism because like narrative in the business world started to be something that was like less woo woo, more viable. How do you tell the story of your organization? How do you do it with funders? How do you do it with investors? And I started looking at, well, what if the whole idea of narrative, how would I look at a whole movement if it were an organization? I drew up this whole model, got lazy, never published it. But I wrote it in it like for research. And the whole idea of the grand narrative, which is big because you're right, you're bringing up these layers, right? There's the layers of, well, I am the myth, or I am the one who can choose how I perceive. Then there are the layers of, then your family or your friends or work or whatever is going to tell you how to perceive said thing. So for example, this is a quick example, Maggie Gyllenhaal and The Lost Daughter. What is that? How is that character in that telling us about how we should feel about the mother who seems selfish, who seems self-serving, right? So it's just like there's a layer, like a woman or a female identifying person could say, okay, yeah, I'm a woman, and then I'm a mother, and then society, then the grand narrative about what a mother is supposed to be. She's supposed to be self-sacrificing. She's supposed to look in the mirror and say, go F off, girl. Nobody got time for you because you got to get to these kids. And then if you're married, then, oh, yep, standing back in the line, girl. You got to get to X, Y, and Z. And I think that's why I zoned in a Little Mermaid. And so this narrative that is set up, and also depending on how your family rolls, right? This narrative of how you're supposed to be, what's expected, and then how we then mediate between those things and those gaps, in addition to mediating it with or against or for ourselves when we come in contact with things that kind of challenge what we've been telling ourselves about ourselves, layered on what other people told us about ourselves or what they said we should. And then also then it makes it all the more a greater responsibility, I think. And then for myself as someone who is creating, putting stuff in the world, I personally want people to be able to look at my things or experience them and engage or go hopefully on their own inquiry or own quest in some way, shape, or form, or think in some way and ask some question about what's beneath the surface. Because it isn't about me and it stops being mine, or about me the moment it's in a book, or the moment it's hanging on the wall, or the moment I put something out, then people are running with it and having their own conversations, hopefully, or doing their own things with it. And so therefore and also, and then if we look at it if we get out of me sounding semi woo woo, there is the area of what you started with, what we're told. So history, one example of history, like looking at who and what is missing in between those gaps, what we repeat about all sorts of things. And it's easy to then say, oh, I'm just going to repeat this. And then when you look back at it, you're like, actually, that there's some missing information, right? Like
I mean,
I'm sure that's happened to both of you at certain points, right?
Yeah, I love it. What you're really talking about is programming and conditioning. And what
Yeah.
I love about this is what I'm taking from your Dark Goddess series is the Dark Goddess is like Lilith or Sekhmet or Hecate, and they're like usually they just the patriarchy is so afraid of them, right?
Yeah.
And for
Oh yeah.
me, yeah, right. So it's like for me, what I think is the Dark Goddess like shakes them up, and then they get scared. And so I love the reclamation of the Dark Goddess within the feminine, in the sacred feminine, because we are conditioned to think, Camelot, where the knight saves the, you
Oh
know,
yes.
saves the
Yes.
princess,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
we're weak, and so where the Dark Goddess is actually like,
Yeah.
no, I have the power here, and she's empowered, and
Well,
it
she's
is the dark.
empowered. She may at times murder her own children. At times she may
Yes.
be leaning back on her haunches, howling into the night. She breaks your vision, and you will not take her tongue. She'll take yours before you take
Exactly.
her. Yeah.
right. And it's also at the same time as talking about going, I love this idea of going backwards in our historical storytelling and filling in those gaps and not being afraid of what it might conjure up inside ourselves.
Right.
And that, a lot of your work is about fear, but it's about fear of yourself. And then it's a fear of self. And it's just like, I like it's just across the board. And so like, what if we did go back? What do you think would happen if we actually started telling the whole story? Because you are definitely interested in the whole. You're very holistic, right?
Yeah.
You're not
Oh
like
yeah.
the good, just the bad, just
Nope.
this. You're like, no,
No.
let's just unpack the entire suitcase and look at every piece and then come up with
Yeah.
an outfit, right? So
I mean,
what do
I
you
do
think
that
would
with
happen?
myself too. I do that with
Mhm.
Right,
myself too.
right.
Not gonna like pitch myself as, oh, I'm like this. No, there are all sorts of pieces all there, and I'm looking at them, and they're looking at me.
Right. Right. So how do you do that? Do you do that through your writing? Is that how you do that for yourself?
I do well for myself, and also I don't know. I mean, it's different, right? If I'm interviewing someone, my goal is, as a journalist, seek the truth, right?
Mhm.
Balance, neutral. Also, though, the extra layer for me is always creating the space so that this person and I can have this space where we're creating something together. And then, like, it goes out. Uh, Poetry, I'm not in control of what, like, even actually sometimes my prose, like what's going to come out, or I think about something. I keep sketchbooks for a million and one things, and it's just like, what's going to come out? And it is integrating these pieces. I think, I'm not saying this is the only reason why we're all having a hard time right now. I mean, there are so many layers, but in the technical normal, before 2020, right? Technically normal, the normal that was working for nobody. Um, right? We know
Yep.
that's true.
Yep.
There's a way that there's a fear, and not if you reveal certain parts of yourself. So we're always trading and negotiating these masks. If we don't do that very carefully, we get punished. And we've seen this some among us who get punished for not negotiating those masks very carefully.
Mhm.
For myself, I've only lived in friggin' boxes. I'm over it. I'm done with it.
Mhm.
Right? I can't do boxes. I can't do, because I already put myself in enough of them. I'm trying to, like, constantly trying to free myself from those. Therefore, I'm hoping, and this is just based off what other people have told me about my work. They said it was a sense of permission.
Mm.
I'm hoping if people take nothing else from even if there's a poem someone doesn't understand, or I'm telling these stories in my memoir that I'm working on. I am scared. I am like coming up with stuff that is, when my family see, it's like they're very supportive, but I'm also afraid in terms of what I'm writing down. Even certain poems I've been producing lately, I'm afraid. I'm looking at them, I'm like, who and what is this? What's going on here? And I'm hoping, I like to say, I'm a patron saint in my own head of different things. And I don't mean like, oh, patron saint of peace, or the patron saint of the unsaid, patron saint of the misbehaving. Like, I like to encourage people to do those things. I feel like a part of the reason why we have been having a hard time as a species is to just be. What would it look like? I posted one time, there's a whole world of questions. What would we be like without institutional gaze? What would we be like without male gaze? What would we be like? And it was riffing off of a question that is posed, like, what would you do for 24 hours without male gaze? Like, for about women, and I think what it was attached to something. But I said, no, let's go down the whole line without financial gaze, without all these ways and all these layers of seeing. Who would we be? And like, what's the feral state like? I'm not saying lawless. It's like some people like Shanta said, no, I didn't say that. But it's like, how could we be our most self?
Love that.
And I do try to do that for myself. And in doing it for myself, I hope I can do it or help with somebody else's pathway to that, if that makes sense.
For me,
Well, yeah.
Go ahead, Lisa. Oh yeah, what I love the feral, because what we are domesticated, extremely domesticated, right? And you're asking us to look in the mirror and go, where is that wild self? Where is that feral self? I think that's really important. And for me, what comes up right now with women's rights on the chopping block, I mean, that's huge. It's big. It's a big time where people, women and men, have to look in the mirror and really question themselves. How can women who are in the fear mode, you know what I mean, express it now and then take their power back? Because we're
that's a good question. That's a good question, because I've been, okay, so I used to work in reproductive health several years ago. I used to work in public health several years ago. Very interesting thing is, knowing what I know, the rights have always been on a chopping block. That's number one. They always have been. Now, for some people who are just coming to and realizing what's happening, it's been. Now it's gotten now to a next level. Like, if we have level 3, level 4, level 5 being the highest, it's gotten that. The other thing is, so there are a couple of things operating for me with that question. I think of my answer from my familial perspective of how I was raised. I come from a line of women who never were going to hand themselves over to anybody, not even to their male partners. That was not happening. And I was taught to be that person. I was taught you are not handing yourself over. And so therefore, take yourself back. Now, early 20s thinking, that doesn't seem quite right. That doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem nice. That's like, that's not loving. And then I turned around. I was like, actually, there's wisdom to that. I'm going to speak the language of the women upon whose shoulders I stand on. And so I've just been saying recently over the past few years to friends, take yourself back. But different people, take yourself back. I think we've given so much of ourselves over that we didn't realize how exhausted we were until there was a moment that forced, again, those of us who could afford to be at home or not have jobs, that forced us to be in public space, where it was a forced, you have to be sitting with yourself. You have to realize how much of yourself was at stake. Always handing yourself over. And so what would be my thoughts about that? I say become a thief. And by that, I mean, go theft time. Go theft time for yourself. Even if it's 4 or 5 minutes, maybe some might look at me and say, it's easy for you to say you don't have kids. Sure. But I wear many roles in my personal life. Theft time. If you cannot have a she shed, if you cannot, you're not in that place, do it in your car. If you can't do it in your car, go do it in a friend's house or whatever. Theft time. Whether it's 5 minutes or 5 minutes.
Yes. Yeah. I think what you said about you don't have kids. I have 3 kids, and I get really mad when people tell people who don't have kids, well, you don't have kids, because I actually think especially women who don't have kids will fill their lives to the top, sort of prove something, because if they can't be a mother, what can they be? Because
It's
you've been
almost like they're
told
trying to prove something. That's a
they
really good
are,
point.
and I
Yeah,
just and
that's a
it's
good point.
usually what bothers me the most about it. It's women saying it to women, and I'm just like,
Uh-huh.
people,
Mm.
we got a lot of
Yeah.
work to do, and if we're up over here
Oh,
like
we diss
knocking
each
each other
other.
down,
We do. We're beating each other
what
in the
do
shin
we do?
with that.
Yeah,
And it's funny because I did parent. I was a parentified child. I was in charge of my brother who has special needs in a two parent home. I was made to be in charge of him. And so I kind of did mother. And then what I did, I architected to take myself back from that household.
right.
But I was headed to college, and I was like, I got to take myself back. And so I feel like my whole life has been an act of taking myself back. But speaking to one of the points that, both have made, if we're in red alert mode, and that's going through your nervous system, well, then how could you properly take yourself back? And I think it also goes back to surrounding ourselves with some kind of nourishment, so that we are surrounding ourselves with people who do give us that permission. We're not telling each other, well, you're not a mother, or you are a mother and therefore, or you work or you don't work, or whatever the is and don't and isn't and is, slut shaming, all the things that we do where we're like, well, so and so's this. And it's just like, yeah, well, you know what? She charges for her time. Can we learn from that? I mean, I'm just being real. Can we learn from that? And so it's just like, don't cut each other down. Be like, I need to invite you to the table and let's share some, ingredients and figure it
Right.
out.
Yeah. What can I, right? Like approach it with either holding it every time you feel yourself going this direction, either hold up a mirror or ask
Right.
yourself, what can I learn from them? As opposed to how can I judge
Absolutely.
them? What can I
Yeah.
learn from them? What can I take away from this
Absolutely.
experience?
Yeah, because
I love
we've been
your
doing that.
yeah, I love your idea of taking time. I mean, it's so funny to me that sounds controversial, and that's like
That
should
it's a
be a
type.
given.
Well, actually, there's a thing I think I came across where I think it was for a business ethics class where they were talking about a case involving theft of time or something. I was like, so I've thought of the whole trope of a time thief. There's nothing wrong with being a time thief.
I love that.
Do it. And do the hell out of it, by the way.
Yeah.
Because you know what?
Right.
Because if there is no you thieving your time, then people will take you, including people's jobs. People will literally take you and squeeze you out like a washcloth. Then when they're done, they won't even rewash you anymore and lovingly dry you and put you back. They'll just toss you aside and get another washcloth to wring out. Theft time.
Theft time. Theft time is self-care, right? Just
It is. It
Yeah.
is. And I don't mean that even. It's so sad how all of these things become buzzy, like self-care. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'd like that spa and stuff. But if you don't have spa and stuff,
Right.
a phone call with somebody will help. So, people, your community. I always say that when I'm doing workshops and things. It's like build your community, your support system.
well,
Yeah.
we have a take an art break movement, and that's really it's not like going to the spa. It's like just sit
Right.
down and draw, or make a line, or if you're
Yes.
mad as hell, just walk in nature. So that's really one of our missions as Artists Moving, to recontextualize
Yes.
what it does or what it means to do self-care. It's very simple on some level.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right. And it doesn't have to be completely stolen by some hashtag and stuff like that. It's basically
Right.
a thing that you do actually, and I believe that you do have to take it back. That is the part of you that you need, right? Like you have to take back so much of yourself. But one of those things, and I'm sure it's in other cultures, but I've only lived in an American culture, so I'm just going to comment on that. I think American culture basically is like that and maybe the reason self-care has to be a hashtag is that people think you're being lazy, or me, this is my personal experience, I think I have to work and like earn my relaxation, and I'm over here like, that should just be part of living. That should just be part of being.
Yeah.
And it's not. It really isn't.
Right. Well, no, it's true. You have a point where it reminds me of the earn your living. Right? What do you do to earn your living? Or I really hate the question of, well, you must pay the bills. And I'm just like, I want to say, well, how are you paying that mortgage on being a human? Now, I never said that. I'm not going to say that to anybody because that's really snarky. But it's one of those things where it's just like, yes, I'm not. So there are lots of movements happening to challenge all sorts of things. So for me, I'm not anti money, for example. I'm not. I gotta eat. I got things to do. I like things. I like to go do things, and that requires
Money.
But what I will say is the way we judge people's busy or leisure. It's just like, are you doing something? And I'm now in the worst at it too, because I am cursed with overachievement. So it's just like, you ask me what I'm doing and I could like, I'm doing this, right? And in order to create, actually, you do actually sometimes need that space for nothing. You need the space for,
that's right,
to just, no one's talking to you, or no one's asking you a question, or you're not beating yourself down. Deadlines are real. Yes, I'm not going to sit up here and say they're fake. You can't mythologize deadline unless you got some real powers. But, it's like, it is a thing. It's a negotiation. It is definitely a negotiation. And thinking about how do we, it is that inquiry of, I once read a quote. It was something about a woman who was on her deathbed. Now, sometimes you don't know if they're making this stuff up. They make stuff up like this. It's like, whatever. Whether she existed or not. A woman on a deathbed who basically, at the end of life, wasn't thinking, I wish I clocked in earlier.
right.
I wish I paid that on time. I wish I did X, Y, and Z. Instead, she's like, well, I wish I ate more ice cream. I wish I did this. I wish I did that. Because like right now we do things like we'll beat ourselves up. Oh, I ate that. I shouldn't have ate that. Oh, I went to go do this thing. I shouldn't have did that. I should. And it's just like, actually, you know what? If something were to happen when your number is called, are you going to be sitting there really? No, you're going to wish you're like, oh my God, I should have gotten into some bigger trouble. I should have gotten into bigger trouble. Just go big. Yes, go do it. I'm not saying harm anybody in the process of that, but like go. So I try to work backwards of the life I kind of want. If I'm lucky enough to have a deathbed in my old age, I want to be able to say, you know what? I wanted to do those things, and I did.
Mm-hmm.
I did, or I met the people I wanted to meet. I saw the places I wanted to see. I do go to abandoned places. I wasn't allowed. I was a strict childhood, so I'm living my teenagehood kind of with some adulting. I just want to warn everybody, I'm an adult. I play one on TV. I impersonate one, as my best friend says. She was like really, really good at impersonating an adult. I said, yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Wow, interesting. I love the idea of bending time, because time keeps on coming up in this conversation, and that time is actually controlling us on some level. So how do we bend time in storytelling? And as we bend time, how do we take ourselves back? Do you know what I mean? How can you guide somebody, a listener right now, to be courageous and curious and just
that's what I was thinking is like, how are you not afraid to do it? How did you figure it out?
I grew up in a household where can't wasn't a word that you used. You don't say you can't do something.
Mm-hmm.
So as I've been writing and stuff has been coming up, instead of saying, God, that sounds so scary, that sounds horrible and horrid, I'm not going to write it. I just write it. When it comes specifically to bending time, there's this one chapter I'll never forget. And it's a working, I say memoir-esque, because I'm doing a lot of bending with it. And there was a chapter where it's Oh, I think I took it from Marquez. Um, one of the titles of his books, blah blah blah, melancholy horrors. But what I did is I turned it into Mama's Melancholy Menfolk or something. I was talking about my mother, and I interlooped some of her story with mine.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did is I embodied the boys I came in contact with. I became them on the page, and I went back in time. I was going back in time. I became them. I was the one asking for my number. I was the one doing certain things and breaking certain boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
I was the one that, instead of me having the crush on this boy, going, I'm the one that's the boy who's being watched. And I did that. And
Wow.
the way, also, there is such a thing in writing of time control. It comes down to, in a very practical sense, your tenses, past, present, future, how you're navigating it, how you're doing that all in a paragraph, how you're doing that all in one sentence. Memento, was it Christopher Nolan, directed by Christopher Nolan? If you look at that movie, and there's a video, I forget the video, on YouTube where he describes how he did the storyline. I think certain parts of the storyline are in black and white, and then the other parts moving in another way are in color. To look at that, and to look at Lost Daughter, I know I keep referencing, thanking one of my students, they suggested that. And the way it does, we do it already, right? The way we do it, if we just think of something simple, right? How many people have been on a Zoom call or in a meeting? They need a scrap of paper. Why? Because they need to write down things like milk, sugar, flour. They are in a meeting, and they're thinking about what's going to happen at the end of that day. And then something said, or someone may even do something, and then you're taken back to being 12 years old. So what you just did, we're all walking time machines, and we do that already. To do it in writing, or people may do it on a canvas, right? You may capture something as it was, or you may put something in the landscape that wasn't there. We do it, and it's looking at something in space and time, and it's looking carefully about with the language that's being used, with the vernacular, how something being said. Is there something, that a metaphor that stands for the thing of when it's about to happen? Like in movies, something's about to happen. What's the music? What is the color? What is the angle that is going to give that? What I did with my short film, Dark Goddess, that goes with the exhibition of the photography and the archives that I dug in Fleming's Museum's collection there. I took a mashup of all these different things, like found footage of previous film and things, some of my original stuff that I shot, mixed with, how is Carrie? How is one of the scenes from Carrie very reminiscent to what a recent director did with Ari's, the short series on Netflix? And I did it. I put them right next by side, and I did this. We're always doing it. And very technically, it's going back and looking at the language. Point of view. Is it going to be first, second, third? Is it going to be omniscient storyteller, like in Toni Morrison's jazz? Who is that speaking? This timeless voice, right?
Yeah, I feel like a cool exercise for someone to do, like at the end of their day, would to be to search for the times during that day that they did that, where they were somewhere but somewhere else at the same time. I think that would be a really interesting sort of reflection on your day, and it might get people to understand that they're, because you're already doing it. You just need to accept it and then use it, you know?
Did Shanta freeze up? Maybe.
We might have lost her. Yep.
Oh,
Okay.
bummer.
I know.
Such a great conversation.
I know.
I love, she'll be coming back. I love the idea of what she was talking about taking a memory, may it be a trauma, and look at from the perspective of, say, the person that you felt did it to you. You know what I mean? So say in like grade school, I had a crush on a boy and he didn't like me, but I became so traumatized from it. You know what I mean? And what if I was that boy, like she said, you
Oh,
know, did you
yes,
know what
I
I
was,
mean? How that would be
yeah,
a healing story, like recontextualize your memories and your life story through that. Wouldn't that be powerful? That I think writing that
yeah.
down. Yeah.
I also, yeah, it's this, she plays a lot with perspective and
Hmm.
identity and who you think you are, who you think
Hmm.
everybody else wants you to
Hmm.
be, who you are in present time, but also who are you in current time. Hello.
We were just riffing
Okay,
off of.
I'm back. Can you? Oh, I can't hear you.
You can't
Oh,
hear us? Can you hear us?
Let's see here.
technology.
Technical difficulties. Well, maybe
Um,
she'll try to hop on again. Go ahead.
yeah, I think it's a beautiful exercise to really look at memories and trauma. And I never thought of that, looking at through the eyes of the person, not yourself, but that person that you think did it to you. You think did it to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of sort of taking your right, like she was saying, taking yourself back into that, but also what can you learn from this situation? Um, right. She's definitely not playing the victim role. She's
Hmm.
taking
Right.
empowerment, right? And I love
Okay.
that. Can you hear us now?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes,
Sorry
We
about
were
we were
that.
just
just
we were just
we were just
riffing. I love the idea of what you said. Like I love the idea of like the memoir, going back into your life and bending time and actually. So I love like my metaphor would be. So I had a crush on this boy when I was in elementary school, and he didn't like me, and I thought I was the victim, right? But what if
Right.
I'm the boy? Do you know what I mean? And what
Yeah.
does he feel, and how that is healing, and that is it's amazing. I think it's
It gives
profound.
you. It gives you some freedom,
Yeah.
and it also. It's one of those things where you memory in and of itself is a time trick anyway. Anytime
Right.
they found that, anytime the more we retell something,
Mhm.
the less accurate it becomes
Right. That's true.
versus the memory that we leave alone until we surface it, right? So it's not going back in like a file cabinet untouched, their fingerprints all over it.
That's, yeah.
And maybe it's not necessarily a memoir, maybe it's through verse, maybe it's through I've been journaling since I was 12
Hmm.
years old. I keep you know record. How are we bearing witness, how are we
Hmm.
thinking about those
Hmm.
things? And even if it's not for healing, maybe it's just something that's a part of the tapestry that we just want to recognize and say, I'm just
Hmm.
going to put this here. Excavating. I often
Uh-huh.
use that term of the excavating and playing in my own cellar hole.
I was
yeah.
thinking the word archaeology for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
also I got to appreciate you kind of brought me off of my own pedestal for a minute there, and I appreciate that
Hmm.
it's that you're suggesting it doesn't have to be anything. It just is. It's this thing. And I think there's a lot of power in that. A lot of people would assume that that is taking away from the experience, but I actually think you're inviting a lot more people to it.
Hmm.
And,
Right.
you know what I mean? Because like I'm over here because, I want everybody to take an art break. I'm kind of obsessed with it. And so I get on that train of like, you should do it because of this, you should do it because of that. And you're over here like, you should just do it. And I think
Just do it.
that's also like there's
I'm better
power in
than Nike. I'm better than Nike with the
Hmm.
sweatshops. Like, even though
right.
I'm guilty, I have some Nike shoes, but it's like I'm like better than that. Like, it's like, just do it. Just go do
Yeah.
it.
And yeah, just go do it. I mean, that's like sometimes because I'm like, I'm holding people's hands and I want them because I want them to do it
Right.
because I know what happens when you do it. I know what happens when you take an art break. I've done it several times. I've watched everybody do it. And so I
Right.
want to find that right language like you were suggesting. And maybe some people just need to hear that. Just go do it. Just go do it. It
Yeah.
doesn't need to be anything.
Don't
And
put a thing on it, because once you put a thing on it, like I would say like relationships. You start out and it's this thing, and then it has to be courtship, and then it has to be a thing. Then we have to call it something. No, we don't. Just because then it goes into that realm of justifying,
Mm.
and then you need to account for time. Nope. Nope. Even if you're just picking up audio files on I do this a lot. Pick up the phone, hit record, speak into it. Doesn't have to be anything.
right.
I have a
Right.
lot of stuff that's like not necessarily en route to being published. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. It's just there, just hanging
I
out.
mean, it's like the human being versus the human doing. But, I mean, that's
Yeah.
always said, right? And this is all about being, just being. But also, like, I mean, when we're talking to you, I'm thinking, like, if you're being and you jump on that magic carpet, there's a ride you're going to go on. I mean, it's unlimited imagination. When I look at you, you're pure imagination, right?
Thank you. Well, I mean, I hope. I mean, this is,
Mhm.
I mean, prime example.
Mhm.
My best friend was like this, I get to her place and she's like, oh, we were due to leave the next day. We didn't know what time we're going to leave. We're just going to figure it out. No rushing. I was like, wow, you mean like, what am I going to, this is so cool. We checked out this abandoned place that really looked like it had no path. We did that. Then we just, got to our destination, and then we're like, what do you want to do? We'll just drive around. Let's see what's nearby. Let's just do that. I used to always, when I'd go to DC for conferences for years, I loved nothing more than to ditch my bags and just walk around, like
Mhm.
DuPont Circle or whatever. I didn't know where I was going. And I'm
Yeah.
not from there. I didn't have any agenda. I just walked. I was just like, I'm just going to walk. I'm just going to see what's around. I want to nose around.
Yeah, nose around. I mean, let's nose around life. I mean, thank you very much. I think that's great. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I feel like honestly I could talk to you all day.
Yeah.
So I hope we can speak to you again in the future. But for
Oh,
now,
love that.
I
Yeah.
want to say thank you.
Yeah, I think
Thanks
we
for
hit on so many things. You know what I mean? It's almost like we have to excavate what we were talking about because
I
there's
know. I know. Like, I find that with a lot of conversations where I step back and I'm like, wow, let me think about this. Like, I'm just sitting there. My friends do this to me all the time. I have awesome friends. They'll say something. They'll like, oh, I want to just drop this question in your ear. What do you think of this? And then I take that question, and sometimes I ask other friends.
I
And it's just
love
like this
that.
whole string. And I'm just like, what do you think about this? I was thinking about blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's out. Some of it's like really out there. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Like,
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now, and we'll be talking to you again in the
thank you.
future.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate